A storm rages outside a decaying palace, the final prison for the world's most powerful man. Kublai Khan, the legendary Mongol Emperor, did not meet a glorious end. This is the story of his horrific downfall, a dark mystery pieced together from personal tragedy, catastrophic failure, and physical decay. By the end, you will understand the exact sequence of events that caused an empire to crumble from within. We will uncover how a ruler who conquered the world was ultimately broken by it. What you believe is the true price of ultimate power. His name echoed across the continents, from the markets of Venice to the ports of Korea. Kublai Khan stood as the undisputed master of the largest contiguous land empire the world has ever known. His dominion stretched from the edge of the Pacific Ocean all the way to the shores of the Black Sea, a staggering tapestry of steppes, cities, and farmlands united under a single powerful will. This was the zenith of Mongol power, a golden age forged not just by the sword, but by breathtaking ambition. Kublai did not merely conquer China, he sought to become its rightful emperor, its son of heaven. In a masterstroke of political theater, he founded the Yuan Dynasty, formally declaring himself the ruler of all under heaven and anchoring his nomadic legacy to the ancient throne of China. To cement this new identity, he commanded the construction of a new capital, a city of unparalleled splendor called Dadu. This was the foundation upon which modern Beijing would one day be built, a meticulously planned metropolis with grand boulevards, intricate waterways, and a palace so vast its walls enclosed rolling hunting grounds. Here in his legendary summer palace of Xanadu, the court was a spectacle of cultural fusion. Persian astronomers shared their charts with Chinese engineers, Tibetan monks debated with Islamic scholars, and artists from every corner of the empire created a new cosmopolitan art. The Venetian merchant Marco Polo, who served in Kublai's administration for 17 years, would later write of palaces roofed with gold and vermilion, of a mobile bamboo palace that could be dismantled and carried on ox carts, and of festivals where 40,000 guests dined on delicacies while clothed in silks of the finest weave. This was an empire at its absolute peak, a beacon of trade, innovation, and seemingly limitless power. How does a man who commands such a world, who can summon armies with a word and build cities from his imagination, begin to fall? The descent started not with a foreign enemy, but from within his own family, a crack in the dynasty's very foundation. Yet even an emperor cannot command the sea. Kublai Khan's ambition stretched beyond the mainland toward the island nation of Japan. He launched not one, but two massive naval invasions, the largest the world had ever seen. His fleets, carrying tens of thousands of veteran soldiers, were meant to overwhelm the Japanese defenders, but on both occasions a violent typhoon rose from the deep, smashing his ships to splinters and drowning his armies. The Japanese called these divine winds the kamikaze, and they saw them as a sign of heavenly protection. For Kublai, it was a catastrophic and humiliating failure, a stark message that his power had limits. These were not just storms, they were financial disasters, sinking the empire's wealth into the ocean, along with its military prestige. The relentless campaigning did not stop there. He pushed his armies into the jungles of Vietnam and the islands of Java, launching costly wars in Southeast Asia. These campaigns were grueling affairs, where the terrain and climate proved to be enemies just as deadly as any soldier. The Mongol cavalry, masters of the open steppe, were bogged down in sweltering forests, decimated by disease and guerrilla attacks. These wars bled the imperial treasury dry for little to no gain, draining the morale of his people and the loyalty of his commanders. The empire was overstretched and the cracks were beginning to show. Then the blows turned deeply personal. His wife, Empress Chabi, passed away. She was far more than a companion. She was his most trusted political advisor, a voice of wisdom and stability who had helped him navigate the complex transition from Great Khan to Chinese emperor. Her death left a void in his heart and in his court that no one could fill. The emotional devastation was compounded by another, even crueler loss. His chosen heir and favorite son, Prince Zhenjin, a man known for his capability and virtue, died suddenly. This was the true fracture in the dynasty's future. Zhenjin was the carefully groomed successor, the man meant to hold the empire together after Kublai was gone. His death shattered the emperor's spirit and plunged the succession into a dangerous uncertainty. The man who had once commanded the world was now isolated in a gilded cage of his own making, surrounded by the ghosts of his family and the echoes of his failures. How does a leader, broken by grief and haunted by defeat, continue to rule? The answer lies in a desperate and ultimately destructive search for solace. The emperor's world began to shrink, collapsing inward from the vast expanse of his empire to the four walls of his private chambers. Grief became his new tyrannical ruler. Consumed by the loss of his wife and his heir, Kublai Khan fell into a profound depression, a shadow that dimmed the splendor of his court. He sought solace in the only comforts he could command without resistance: food and drink. His legendary banquets, once displays of imperial power, became private, desperate rituals of consumption. He ate and drank with a compulsive intensity, trying to fill the emptiness inside him with sheer physical sensation. The vibrant, active ruler who once led hunts across the steppe was gone, replaced by a man sinking into a self-made prison of flesh. The consequences were swift and brutal. His body, pushed beyond its limits, began to rebel in the most agonizing ways. He developed a severe and crippling case of gout, a condition where uric acid crystallizes in the joints, causing excruciating pain with even the slightest movement. His feet and knees became swollen, fiery traps of agony that made walking impossible. Confined to a chair or his bed, his immobility accelerated his decline into obesity, and he likely suffered from what we would now call diabetes, a constant draining sickness that left him feeble. The mighty Khan, who once directed the movements of armies, could no longer command his own body. Imagine the scene inside the grand palace of Dadu. The halls that once echoed with the footsteps of ambassadors and generals grew quiet, their silence broken only by the emperor's labored breathing. He became a reclusive figure, hidden away in shadowy rooms, surrounded by physicians and their ineffective remedies, bowls of bitter medicine sitting untouched beside platters of rich food. The empire, a complex machine that required a steady hand at the wheel, was now left to drift. Court factions schemed for power, corruption festered in the provinces, and the once unified realm began to fracture, all while its emperor lay trapped, a prisoner of his own suffering, unable to stem the tide of decay lapping at the foundations of his world. From the quiet agony of his bedchamber, the sounds of a crumbling empire began to echo. The discontent Kublai Khan could no longer manage exploded into open rebellion. For decades, the common people of China had been crushed under the weight of his ambitions, forced to pay exorbitant taxes to fund his disastrous wars in Japan and Java. With the emperor now a ghost in his own palace, corrupt officials and local Mongol princes squeezed the population even harder, bleeding the land dry to fill their own coffers. The resentment, simmering for a generation, finally reached a boiling point. It started not with a single army, but with 1,000 sparks of fury across the countryside. Peasants, bandits, and disgruntled former soldiers began to band together, forming secret societies dedicated to one goal: driving the Mongol invaders back to the steppes. The most powerful of these movements was the Red Turban Rebellion, named for the bright red scarves its followers wore as a symbol of their defiance. They were a chaotic and fervent force, blending militant Buddhism with a deep yearning to restore a native Chinese dynasty. Their ranks swelled with every new tax levy, every instance of Mongol brutality. They attacked government offices, seized grain stores, and raided the estates of wealthy collaborators. The vast Mongol military machine, once an unstoppable force, was suddenly stretched thin, forced to fight a hydra of uprisings that had no single head to cut off. Imagine the reports that would have been read to the ailing emperor, maps unfurled beside his bed showing province after province slipping into chaos. A city here, a crucial canal there, all falling to the rebels. The very infrastructure Kublai had built, the roads and granaries that held his empire together, were now being used by his enemies to coordinate their attacks. He was the architect of his own humiliation, a ruler who had conquered the world but could not hold the hearts of his people. He did not live to see the final dramatic collapse. The Yuan Dynasty would linger for another 70 years after his death, but it was a hollow shell, forever bleeding territory and legitimacy. Kublai Khan, the man who worked so hard to become the Emperor of China, was ultimately the one who set in motion its loss. The empire did not fall to a foreign conqueror, it rotted from within, its foundation cracked by grief, its walls broken by the hammers of the very people he had failed to rule. So the final chapter of Kublai Khan's life was written not on a battlefield, but in the quiet torment of a sick room, the supreme ruler of the largest land empire in history was reduced to a ghost of his former self, trapped in a body racked by gout and disease, his mind clouded by grief and despair. The man who had launched 1,000 ships could no longer walk. The emperor who had feasted 40,000 guests now dined alone, a prisoner to his own sorrow and the relentless physical decay that followed. His world, which once stretched from sea to sea, had shrunk to the four walls of his chamber, while outside, the Red Turban Rebellion spread like a wildfire he was too feeble to extinguish. His death in the year 1294 was as undignified as his final years. There was no heroic last stand, no final proclamation to his people. He simply faded away, likely succumbing to the cumulative failures of his body, a lonely and broken figure in the vast, silent palace he had built. The supreme irony is profound. Kublai Khan, the outsider who conquered China and worked so tirelessly to become its legitimate son of heaven, became the very author of its loss. His relentless military campaigns bankrupted the treasury and bred the popular resentment that fueled rebellion. His personal tragedies shattered his spirit, causing him to neglect the empire until it fractured beyond repair. And his death created a vacuum of power that plunged the Yuan Dynasty into a bitter succession crisis from which it never truly recovered. The empire he built with such ambition did not fall to a greater conqueror. It crumbled from the inside, its foundations turned to ash by the flaws of its creator. What do you think was the most tragic element of this great Khan's horrific end? Was it the humiliating military defeats, the cruel loss of his family, his painful physical decline, or the rebellion that consumed his life's work? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and if you want to uncover more stories of how the mighty have fallen, subscribe for more deep dives into the dark histories of the world's greatest empires.